America has a weapon that can cripple any nation on Earth without firing a single shot. It's not a bomb, a submarine, or a fleet of stealth aircraft. It's something far more subtle, yet in many ways more powerful. It's a weapon woven into the very fabric of our modern world, hidden in plain sight, and used every single day. This weapon is the US dollar, and for over half a century, its dominance has been absolute. But this weapon has a fundamental flaw, a vulnerability that has forced America's rivals to begin the monumental task of building an escape hatch. For decades, the United States has controlled the world's financial plumbing. This is not just a position of influence, it is a position of overwhelming power, one that allows it to turn a country's economy off like a switch. From an office building in Washington, D.C., the U.S. can politically and economically isolate a nation, starve it of critical resources, and bring it to its knees. This is a new kind of conflict, financial warfare. And through it, the U.S. has laid economic siege to entire countries, impacting the lives of hundreds of millions of people. But the world is waking up. The very act of using this weapon, of demonstrating its terrifying power, is forcing America's biggest rivals to fight back. They are building a bypass, a new set of financial pipes, pumps, and valves designed to route around American control. Their goal is not just to survive, but to architect a new world order, one where they are no longer dependent on their primary adversary. So what happens when this bypass is complete? How close are they to achieving this goal, and what will a world with two competing financial systems actually look like? The answers to these questions will define the 21st century.
Section 1. The Global Financial Plumbing.
So how did we get here? How did a simple piece of paper, born in Washington, D.C., become America's most powerful non-military weapon? The story begins in the ashes of World War II. In July of 1944, with the Allied victory in sight, leaders from 44 nations gathered at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their goal was to prevent a repeat of the economic chaos of the 1930s, the Great Depression, the trade wars, and the competitive currency devaluations that had helped pave the road to war. They needed to design a new, stable global economic system. In that room, two visions competed. The British economist John Maynard Keynes argued for a system that would help preserve Britain's battered empire, while the American representative, Harry Dexter White, pushed for a world of open markets and flexible currency exchange. With Europe's industrial base in ruins and America's economy booming, the United States held all the cards. The deal they ultimately struck, known as the Bretton Woods Agreement, put the US dollar at the absolute center of the global economy. Every other major currency was pegged to the dollar, and the dollar itself was pegged to a fixed amount of gold at a rate of $35 per ounce. America made a solemn promise. Any country holding dollars could, at any time, trade them for solid gold from the U.S. Treasury's vaults. This guarantee made the dollar as good as gold, and it quickly became the world's primary reserve currency. If you were a country that wanted to trade on the world stage, you needed to hold dollars. This system brought a period of remarkable stability and growth. But it had a fatal flaw. By the late 1960s, the enormous costs of the Vietnam War and President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society domestic programs meant the U.S. was printing far more dollars than it had gold to back them. The world was flooded with greenbacks, and other countries grew nervous. They began to question if the U.S. could honor its promise. Nations like France, under the increasingly skeptical President Charles de Gaulle, began openly demanding their gold back, at one point even sending the French Navy to New York to collect it. The drain on U.S. gold reserves was becoming a torrent.
Then, on August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon made a shocking announcement that was heard around the world. In a televised address, he unilaterally and immediately severed the U.S. dollar's link to gold. This event, known as the Nixon shock, effectively ended the Bretton Woods system. The global reaction was one of bewilderment and anger, with many viewing it as a unilateral act of American self-interest. This should have been the end of the dollar's supremacy. Why would anyone trust a currency backed by nothing more than a government's promise? But what happened next was a geopolitical masterstroke. Through a series of intense diplomatic negotiations led by Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, the United States solidified a crucial informal understanding with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the world's dominant oil producer. The arrangement was elegantly simple. The U.S. would offer military protection, weapons, and a favored political relationship. In return, the Saudis would ensure that the vast global oil market would continue to price its sales exclusively in U.S. dollars. Other OPEC members followed suit. This created the petrodollar system. Suddenly, any country that needed to buy oil, which was every country, had to acquire U.S. dollars first. This created a massive, permanent, and artificial global demand for American currency. The dollar was no longer backed by gold, it was now backed by black gold. This masterstroke gifted America what the French finance minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing had famously called an exorbitant privilege. Because the world constantly needs dollars to buy oil and conduct international trade, the U.S. can print money to pay for its imports and finance its debts without causing the same kind of runaway inflation that would wreck any other country. It can borrow at lower interest rates, and American citizens and companies benefit from a stronger currency. But most importantly, it gave the U.S. control. The dollar-based system isn't just the water of global finance, it's the pipes, the pumps, and the master valves. And at the heart of it all sits the United States with its hand on the main switch. But having control of the financial plumbing is one thing. How does the U.S. actually turn off the tap on an entire country? The answer lies in a single, obscure, yet indispensable system: SWIFT. SWIFT stands for the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. Founded in 1973, it is not a bank. It does not hold funds or transfer any assets. Think of it as a hyper-secure, specialized messaging service for the global financial industry. When a bank in Germany wants to send money to a bank in Japan, it uses SWIFT to send secure, standardized instructions. It's the financial equivalent of the nervous system, connecting over 11,000 institutions in more than 200 countries and territories, transmitting billions of messages a year that facilitate trillions of dollars in transactions. Without access to SWIFT, a country's banking system is essentially rendered deaf and mute on the world stage, cut off from the global financial conversation. On paper, SWIFT is a neutral cooperative based in Belgium and overseen by the central banks of the G10 nations, designed to be a utility for the entire world. But in reality, the US dollar has decisive and often decisive influence. This influence stems from two key facts. First, the US dollar is the most used currency for international transactions. Second, because the vast majority of these dollar-based transactions must, at some point, be cleared through a U.S. financial institution, this gives the U.S. legal jurisdiction. And Washington is not afraid to use this power. The U.S. Treasury's most potent tool is the threat of secondary sanctions. This is the true power lies. The U.S. can punish any institution, a bank, a company, or even a messaging service like SWIFT anywhere in the world that does business with a targeted entity or nation. The message from Washington is brutally clear: disconnect their banks or we will sanction you, cutting you off from the U.S. financial system.
Faced with the choice between losing access to a single country's market or losing access to the entire U.S. dollar system, SWIFT has always complied. The U.S. can exert this influence on SWIFT's governing body, as it has in the past. This is the dollar weapon in its purest form. It isn't a bomb that levels a city. It's a quiet directive sent from an office building that digitally severs a nation's financial arteries. It stops the flow of money for trade, for investment, and ultimately for survival. It is a 21st century financial siege, a blockade enacted not by warships, but by keystrokes.
Section 3. The Weapon in Action. Case Studies. This isn't a theoretical threat. This is a weapon that has been deployed with increasing frequency and devastating effect. And this is where it becomes clear just how destructive it can be. Take Iran. In the early 2010s, as part of a campaign to halt Iran's nuclear program, the U.S. and its allies imposed a cascade of sanctions. The knockout blow came in 2012. Under intense pressure from Washington, SWIFT made the unprecedented move to disconnect sanctioned Iranian banks. Overnight, Iran was locked out of the global financial system. The effect was catastrophic. The country's economy, which was 15 to 20% smaller than it would have been without the sanctions, was plunged into a deep recession. Iran's oil exports were strangled. Its currency, the rial, collapsed by 56% between 2012 and 2014, and inflation skyrocketed to around 40%. But the pain wasn't just felt by the government or in the halls of power. Though humanitarian goods like food and medicine were technically exempt, the sanctions on the banking system made it nearly impossible to finance their import. International banks, fearing punitive U.S. secondary sanctions, adopted a policy of over-compliance, refusing to handle any transactions related to Iran, even legal ones. The results were tragic. Hospitals couldn't get spare parts for critical medical equipment. Patients couldn't get specialized cancer drugs or treatments for rare diseases like hemophilia and epidermolysis bullosa, a painful genetic skin condition. The dollar weapon doesn't just target regimes, it creates widespread, indiscriminate suffering for ordinary people. If Iran was a test case for the weaponization of finance, Russia in 2022 was the main event. In the days following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. and its allies unleashed what many called the financial nuclear option. They ordered SWIFT to disconnect several of Russia's largest and most important banks, immediately hobbling their ability to transact internationally. And then they did something truly unprecedented, shattering a core tenet of international finance. They froze the foreign currency reserves of Russia's own central bank. Roughly $300 billion held in dollars, euros, and other currencies in accounts around the world was suddenly made inaccessible to Moscow. For decades, it had been a sanct-to-sanct principle that a country's sovereign reserves, its national savings, were untouchable. This action obliterated that trust. The freezing of Russia's assets sent a terrifying message to every other nation on the planet, especially China. That message was simple. Your national savings are not truly yours. They are a privilege, not a right. And that privilege can be revoked at any moment if you defy the U.S.-led global order. The immediate impact was chaos. The ruble crashed, the Russian stock market was forced to close, and citizens rushed to withdraw cash, fearing a total collapse. The message was clear and chilling. If this can be done to a nuclear-armed G20 nation, no one is safe. And this is the mistake, the strategic overreach that no one in Washington saw coming. Section 4. The Bypass. Building a New System. You can only push so far before people push back. The repeated and escalating use of the dollar weapon has served as a global wake-up call. It has given America's rivals a powerful existential incentive to build an escape route. They are now working together with a new sense of urgency to construct a financial bypass, a parallel system designed to make them immune to American sanctions and financial pressure. The chief architects of this new system are the BRICS nations. This bloc, originally Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has now expanded to include major energy producers like Iran and the UAE, alongside Egypt and Ethiopia. With these recent additions, the group represents about 45% of the world's population and over a third of global GDP in purchasing power terms. For these nations, the project of de-dollarization is not just an economic policy, it is a declaration of sovereignty. The sanctions imposed on Russia after its 2014 annexation of Crimea were the first major catalyst. Realizing its acute vulnerability, Russia began the slow and difficult process of building its own alternative to SWIFT, called the System for Transfer of Financial Messages, or SPFS. Initially a domestic system, Russia is now aggressively trying to connect SPFS with the financial systems of other countries, especially its BRICS partners. But the real contender, the system that poses the biggest long-term challenge to SWIFT, is being built in China. It's called CIPS, the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System. Launched in 2015, CIPS is purpose-built to settle international payments in China's own currency, the yuan. While CIPS often still uses the SWIFT network for messaging, it has the capability to operate independently, creating a direct channel for yuan-denominated trade that can completely bypass the US dollar and the American financial system. Following the 2022 sanctions, Russia pivoted hard to CIPS and its own SPFS to continue receiving payment for its crucial oil and gas exports to China and other nations. And CIPS is growing. By 2025, it had expanded to include over 1,500 participating institutions from more than 100 countries, processing transactions worth over 100 trillion yuan annually. This effort isn't just about building new platforms, it's about fundamentally changing behavior. We're seeing a proliferation of bilateral agreements to sidestep the dollar. India and the UAE are now settling some oil trades in their local currencies, rupees and dirhams. Brazil and China, two massive trading partners, have a deal to do the same. Central banks around the world, wary after seeing Russia's reserves frozen, are steadily increasing their holdings of gold while reducing their exposure to U.S. government bonds. Every single trade conducted in yuan, every barrel of oil sold for rupees, is another small chip taken out of the dollar's monolithic foundation. But this is where the situation gets dangerous for everyone.
Section 5. The Future of the Fight. This new battlefield is a clash of systems, a digital Cold War fought not with tanks and spies, but on payment terminals and in the digital ledgers of central banks. A world split into two competing financial blocks, one centered on the dollar and one designed to operate without it, isn't just a problem for bankers and governments. Such a fragmentation could mean a world of disrupted supply chains, higher transaction costs for everyday goods, and slower global economic growth for everyone. The very system of globalized trade that lifted billions of people out of poverty could begin to slow or even run in reverse. To be clear, the dollar's reign isn't ending overnight. The U.S. financial system possesses immense, deeply entrenched advantages. Its markets are the deepest and most liquid in the world, meaning vast sums of money can be moved without destabilizing prices. There's still a deep-seated trust in U.S. institutions and the rule of law that protects assets. And most importantly, the dollar benefits from an enormous network effect. Everyone uses the dollar because everyone else uses the dollar. Over half of all global trade is still invoiced in dollars. But the trend is undeniable, and the direction of travel is clear. The dollar's share of global central bank reserves has fallen from over 71% in 1999 to around 57% by late 2025. The goal for the BRICS nations and their allies isn't necessarily to replace the dollar, at least not at first. The strategy is to create a viable alternative. They want to build a world where being cut off from SWIFT and the dollar is no longer an economic death sentence, but merely an inconvenience. They are creating an out. And once that bypass is fully built, tested, and trusted, America's most powerful weapon loses its sting. For more than half a century, the world has run on a single financial operating system, with the US dollar at its core. The United States leveraged this privileged position into a powerful weapon, and its repeated use against nations like Iran and Russia showed the world just how devastating that weapon can be. But that very aggression has backfired. It has served as a global catalyst, accelerating a movement to build an alternative financial architecture. A new world is being constructed, piece by piece, trade by trade, led by a growing alliance of nations determined to claim their monetary independence. We are witnessing the slow but steady splitting of the world into two competing financial spheres, one centered on the dollar and one designed to thrive without it. The most dangerous weapons aren't always the ones you can see. Sometimes they're the systems you depend on every day. Is this the slow-motion end of America's financial empire? Or is this just a temporary challenge to an otherwise unshakable system? Let me know what you think in the comments below.